Another interesting discussion, a lot of smart contracts, ICOs, modern applications, decentralization. That was exciting. Since we are not that many, what I suggest is that the people in the back, maybe you can come in front here. We have a lot of space for you. We'll make the event more social. Maybe the gentlemen's on the side as well. Okay, we'll just make a very, very like light social conversation right now. But for this, I would like to tell you that the next session is around deep technologies. And according to McKinsey, the sector will create a 30 trillion uptick in the world economy by 2013. This is why I would like to invite Dr. Jacques BUGHIN, a senior partner at McKinsey and director at McKinsey Global Institute, and his panelists to have a discussion about deep tech, artificial intelligence on the stage. It will be an exciting discussion between financial institutions, startup founders, corporate executives, and accelerator managers.
It looks like people are going to take a early lunch, which is fine, so we're going to be cozy on this panel. So as you know, I don't know the definition of deep tech per se, but we talk about high tech, low tech, deep and light tech. I don't know what it is, but for the sake of this discussion, I guess we're going to be very pragmatic. It's all new tech that allows us to basically make scalable businesses in Europe and of course globally. Now, today is also an interesting day because a accompanying event is happening at the same exact moment called a Slash Conference, and Atomico there just released a report, especially with the title Deep Tech Opportunity. And bottom line, the findings is quite simple, is that deep tech is growing quite nicely in Europe, but, and there was always a but in the title, is that deep tech is not necessarily as scalable as it should be in Europe. Now, they quote a few elements, and again, the usual suspects are always there. Not enough money, you know, some red taping, both digitally and outside digital. There will be questions as to skills. There is questions as to, you know, luck and obviously timing and time to market. So all these elements are basically mentioned in the reports. Now, again, that's great to have a report, and myself, I've done such reports, but the point is to get the truth, and the truth is obviously coming from this panel, because this panel is actually a panel which is the value chain of deep tech. Now, we got from the upstream side, you know, Shiva, obviously, at the European Investment Bank, leading some of the advisory division, has come to at least know how to fund these businesses, and I'm quite sure there will be some hope that you can do more or differently. We can go to the accelerator side of the business in Romania, which you do very well, and I guess we got two people who have done the jump and the successful jump. So obviously, sometimes we say we have to learn from the mistakes, but for this time, we're going to actually, you know, get you to talk about the success that you have done. So the way we will do it is quite simple. I will ask each of you to introduce not more than, let's say, 2 minutes, what exactly the scope of what you do. And then we're going to start a few questions. If you have questions, raise your hand, shout if you like. The idea is really to get to a solution space here. So I will start with you, Shiva, and you can introduce yourself. I hope this microphone is working.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jacques. Indeed, so my name is Shiva DUSTDAR. Who knows the European Investment Bank? Okay. So there are a few of you who don't. So we are the Bank of the European Union. And what you may not know is that even though we are known for financing Eurotunnel, big infrastructure projects, we also have a rather we have many different good programs to also finance startups and all types of companies in sort of all sizes, but we do that through various means. So we do it on the one hand through our subsidiary, the European Investment Fund, who invest in VC funds, or also give guarantees to banks. And when projects are a bit larger, and we have, in fact, NAVYA here, you'll hear a bit more, then we can do a direct financing via a venture debt like patient capital. I'm representing the area of advisory. This is where actually companies that are not sure yet if they are large enough, if they're ready for a potential direct financing, would come to us. We provide them financial advice whereby we, on the one hand, see indeed whether they have the necessary readiness and also prepared really their dossier, so to speak, to target, to have the right information for the future due diligence by the EIB. We provide them some guidance, what the issues might be, in fact, preempt already some of the key risks and help them to address them. Because as you know, you can only make a first impression once. And so this is the support of the advisory. We also provide market studies, and some of them are pretty much around the topic of the panel today, deep tech. We always look at what we can do better to finance companies better, what it is that actually is keeping a lot of the financing away, the information asymmetries and so on. So happy to be here, and also happy to hear from one of our clients what EIB does well and what we can do better.
Great. I will ask Diana to be next.
Thank you. I'm Diana RUSU. I'm leading Spherik Accelerator. Spherik Accelerator was the first accelerator established in Romania in 2013, and since then has been year after year rewarded by the entire community as the best accelerator in Romania. Our main purpose is to open opportunities for startups, so that's the final goal. And we do that through our very specific customized supports to startups, but also by opening doors at European level, also partnering with US partners. And I think it's what we do the best is building partnerships. We are coming from an area that doesn't really excel in providing a lot of support to entrepreneurs. So we saw our role to kind of bridge the gap and understand how we can attract the resources to the area and how we can really have this kind of democratization of opportunities. So if you have a potential, you should not just, be disappointed that you don't have the open doors to really build a business, scale it, and have a successful one, just because you're coming from the CE area.
I guess you said it and I didn't catch it. When did you start the accelerator?
Spherik is in Cluj, which is in the heart of Transylvania. That's also kind of an exception. Usually you have this kind of accelerators in the capital city, but Cluj, it's much more known in Romania as the startup city.
That's great. Pierre, because I'm quite sure you can answer the question how happy you were from the money you received from the EIB. I'm quite sure you're going to say more money is going to be the best. But anyway, just tell us a bit more about what you do. I guess you have a video if we want to show the video. Pierre, you say when you want it and you
well, we can show the video and then I will explain two things about it.
Can we run the video, please?
It's live, that's why. hope that you can see really here that what I wanted to highlight with this video is to show you that these deep tech and what you are doing is really commercial now. And we are on the market. So instead of saying what we are doing, I wanted just to show this video. And we are in 20 countries. We sold more than 100 shuttle all around. And we, in Europe, we are in advance in autonomous vehicle.
Great. Yasir, as well, you are one of these product champions. So I wanted to explain what you do.
Sure. So we're also a AI-focused company. We are in the agriculture space, actually. And our AI is called IDA. And you want to think of IDA like a Siri or Alexa, but for farmers. We've demonstrated that we can run a farm about 30% more efficient than a human alone. We've done this several times in about 11 countries now, specifically for dairy farming for the time being, but we're training IDA to learn how to farm other types of crops as well. The core problem we're trying to address is you need a 60% increase in food production by 2050. That's a fact. We're not going to do that by increasing crop yields anymore due to mechanization. So what we find is that the answer to that problem is to use or apply AI to that problem space.
Fantastic. So let's go to the key question of the panel, is that how do we scale that? And again, I'm quite sure there are just many bottlenecks. Let's start with one we haven't talked too much about, data. How do you get the data, both to train the AI or both to train what you do? And like, what has been your perspective about data in Europe?
Well, I guess I'm holding the mic. I'll go first. So there's a lot of talk about data right now. We see a lot of companies in this space who are trying to accumulate a lot of data and aggregate a lot of data. But when it comes to AI, it's not necessarily the right type of data. What you need for AI is something called ground truth, which is collecting a type of data that actually says this is true, and then you essentially label that data if you want to do that the right way. Now, obviously, some data sets exist, some data sets don't exist, but for a lot of companies, that is their core IP. That is their core strength. So, for example, if you have driverless cars, you would have spent a lot of time collecting and labeling data and then training your AI. If I put a more democratic hat on, I would say that, well, from a regulatory standpoint, you might want to say, listen, we want to open source a lot of training data sets, albeit in small batches, so you can innovate on them. Because the actual problem in scaling is not really the data. That slows you down if you don't have the great training data set. The actual thing that you need to do is execution. And actually running an AI platform in an AI company is a very different ballgame than just having a training data set and proving you can do something. That's more research.
Good point. I'm quite sure you got this. Why don't you share your experience about that?
Well, exactly. Data is not the real issue there. And data is a relative notion. Everybody is asking us for data. We are working with universities, we are working with private people, and everybody is asking us to allow them to go to the data and to use the data. But when we give them the data, with the raw data, they don't know what to do with it. So what's most important, what you have highlighted, is not the data itself. The data are sensors you can collect, you have lidars, you have sensors, you have radars, you have everything. But how you architecture all this to feed an intelligence, artificial intelligence, and what do you do with this data? How do you analyze it? How do you build it inside an environment? And how do you take a decision regarding this? And this is the most important. So when universities ask us, we want to go into your data collection, we want to have all the points of the leaders, etc. Okay, we can give it to you, but what do you want to do with that? What is the aim of that?
Yeah, so I think you make a good point. Data is obviously necessary, but it's not sufficient for making a great business model. So you need capabilities and skills. Now, going to Shiva, I mean, in the advisory, you say you look at certain type of companies, and you look at whether they are ready to get the money from you because of different criteria. Ali, what are the criteria that you look at? Skills, size, market, business plan? Well, explain to us how it works.
So by the time companies come, certainly for the advisory, they are usually sort of past the startup phase. So they've reached a certain level of, I would say they're around in the C round, you know, they would be looking for that growth capital to really go that extra, you know, the extra next big step. Now, what we very often see is that these companies have so far gone to very specialist, either specialist or some very, you know, the famous family, friends and fools type capital providers. They have, so one of the things that we're looking for, is their story one that now can be understood by a more mainstream investor, a bank that is now looking at, okay, how do I get my money paid back? Looking at it from a credit perspective, from a debt perspective. The financing we provide at that stage is something of an equity type financing. We call it venture debt, but it is perhaps, for those of you who know the venture debt product from the US one, I would say the one that the EIB provides has longer tenor. It is a bit more patient and hopefully therefore also less dilutive, certainly less dilutive than pure equity. So, but it is really paving the way for potentially future debt financing, which I believe is ultimately in the interest of many of these companies, that they have not just very, you know, this very rich equity that they give away early on in the process. So what we're looking often is therefore, how can they translate this, the story that is very often very tech heavy, to an investor who is ultimately trying to understand how does this technology translate into a commercial value proposition that actually solves an issue and that people are willing to pay money for. And that's where we often see already, you know, that there is more preparation needed. We of course then look at the market risk. How are they setting up themselves to actually get their product to market and scale that, and in order to get the revenues? Because this is also where we often see the transition in the management. They have had a lot of focus on the R&D, on getting the product, but the commercialization may have been underinvested in. So we're trying to really then focus on, so what are you doing in order to going out and getting those contracts in place? So there is a combination, therefore, of the actual, I would say, analysis of the company, but also then the qualitative side of the management quality, the approach. How is the founder very often, how is he or she really trying to scale the skills and bring in new skills in? Because we know that ultimately when you have a more traditional investor come into this, they are not necessarily going to give you that much the benefit of the doubt. They would like you to have something that they can easily understand and compare with industries, and that's maybe the other big thing. I think AI, for many of us who are not in the field, it's exciting, but it's also terrifying. So you need to tell us in parallels and analogies, perhaps, you know, it's like the electricity, and it's like this, and it's like that, so that we can actually draw parallels and understand what you're actually trying to do. Because very often, as a financial investor, we may not have the skills to understand your story.
Thanks so much for it. Two questions, because again, we talk about scaling here. So how many people, or how many companies actually knocking at your door just to get an idea about, you know, is it really, you know, the fault of the financial system, whatever it is, because sometimes, you know, the startup will complain they don't have enough funding, they don't have any way to scale. But how many really knock at your door? And two, when they knock, how many just get the funding?
Well, the EIB
if you can say it.
Yeah, it's a difficult question because ultimately EIB Group has many doors, yeah? I mean, and there are many ways to get into to ultimately access financing. As I mentioned, there are many of the companies here would actually not be knocking at our door. They would be knocking at the doors of venture capital providers who are getting financing from our EIF. So the ones that are like NAVYA, who are maybe at that level, yes. So they, I mean, we have so far had a portfolio of roughly 1.5 billion of such financing. I think there are around 70 or so deals in that. In the advisory side, we have currently a portfolio active portfolio of 50 of such companies that we are helping to access financing. But you're absolutely right. We cannot, cover the whole market, and I think that is actually the key. The EIB should be the catalytic part that really enables you to get to the bigger market. And I hope, therefore, that certainly through advisory, we are not advising just for EIB financing, because the benefit that people get very often is that they can then go to their other investors, to other venture debt providers, and get the benefit of having a narrative, a story that actually opens doors to different type of capital than the one they have had so far. And I think that is hopefully the benefit, that we unlock other capital.
Good point. Turning to you, in terms of the accelerator, I asked you whether it was called accelerator or incubator. You say accelerator. So you accelerate businesses. What's the demand at this stage in your country for this kind of instrument, if you like?
What kind of instruments are you referring to?
The structure that you create possibly is there for what reason? It's basically a G&A, it's a G&A aspect, or is it simply a pooling aspect? Is it a skill training aspect? What exactly is the demand from the startup at this stage?
I think not just in Romania, in CE area, we are developing the deep tech ecosystem. So you have some capabilities, but you need to put them together, and you need to rally also the other stakeholders. So we are building on a strong outsourcing industry, which is powering in Romania 6% of the GDP, and it's expected to grow up to 10%. And many of my colleagues see it as a problem in having also startups when you have a very strong outsourcing industry. We don't consider it as a problem, because we work a lot with this kind of companies in order to power the new startups, because for deep tech startups, it's not just about 2 or 3 people gathering and having an idea. Execution is quite important, and when you don't really have the resources at hand, you need to know how to build partnerships. So our role is how to get all the resources together, and how to teach, also how to curate this kind of partnerships. So we have a strong collaboration with KPMG, so we align also a big corporate in Romania. And I think this is essential for the new generation of startups, because until they get to the EIB for funding, that's a long way, and we need to be careful not to die in the process, which is quite 9 out of 10 cases. So for us, it's important how we get from idea, how we help the team to understand the execution process, what are the steps, and how you get allies along the way. Because usually for the internet startups, let's say, you can accelerate in 3 or 6 months, but for the deep tech startups, I think acceleration starts from 1 year to more than 1 year. So you need to have a lot of capital to survive in this period. But I think that's the asset in the CE countries, because with the same amount of money you would get in France, you have twice the runway. So it's a good opportunity to understand how you can develop the product maybe in the CE and then be prepared to scale somewhere else. And also I think the affordability of the talent in the CE. It's not anymore that cheap, but it's cheaper than in different other parts of the world. So for our stake in this area is to show the opportunities, usually those that are portrayed as challenges. But we are very entrepreneurial, so when all the others are seeing challenges, we turn them into opportunities.
That's good. So I'm just trying to close the chapter about finance and skills. So each of you should say yes and no. Do we have a skill problem in Europe? I would say skills in deep tech is actually quite good compared, let's say, to a US as a benchmark or whatever you want, China. Would you say yes? We obviously have a skill issue, but are we worse off than the US and China? What's your view?
No, I don't think we have, skills. You're referring to skills, yeah. I think I referred to this gentleman yesterday. He said it's not the skills, it's actually how we apply, deploy the skills.
Yes.
So
Okay.
it's not
Good.
my word, but I think it was a
I
good
agree.
way of catching it.
Exactly. Pierre, your point?
Well, we have a lot of skills, and that's why Google and others are coming to Europe,
Good.
getting our skills,
Good.
paying more.
Okay. What's your view on skills? We have enough?
We have the skills, but let's not just, like stay with the potential.
Okay, good.
We have a type of skill. I think the skill that actually is lacking are the skills that come relevant when you scale. There's a lot of R&D skill, there's a lot of academic skill, there's a lot of skill coming from universities. The problem is you don't have any large, successful AI-based companies in Europe that have done it and have been doing it for years. So for example, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, all these companies, they're putting people with European skill that they have and giving them a really big fat engine to run. That we don't have.
That's a very good point. No, I don't want to go back on the finance side. I'm going to go back to some of the discussions sometimes we hear about Europe, which is the AI, deep tech is obviously the beginning. China and US are basically getting a lot of that. In fact, the question is always, well, Europe can still catch up. When you talk to Chinese guys, they tell you something quite basic. They tell you the only way to scale is to get customers. And the best customer you can get is actually the state. 50% or 60% in the first round of the scaling of AI deep tech companies in China is actually the state financing. It's nothing to do with defense and this kind of stuff. Obviously, there are possibly links to that. But the bottom line is that the first customer will actually initiate the marketplace. Well, we have a culture of big public funding, a lot of public state element across Europe. So why are we not doing it? What's the issue there? So you want to jump on that?
I mean, yes, because this is, as I mentioned, we do these thematic studies, and we've had now 22 of them, and it's amazing how, whether we look at the new space sector, whether we look at life sciences, I mean, you name it, deep tech, the common theme that comes out in Europe is it's a rather fragmented, even public support scheme. Fragmented in the sense that you have at national level all sorts of public support schemes, but very often companies, first of all, don't know whether they should go now national or at the EU level, so that's already confusion. Investors don't know whether, because they obviously are looking at companies, but they don't know how to capture the benefit of all this public support. Is it sustainable? Will it continue coming? Because that would actually make the case more viable. So this information asymmetry is actually, and so the fragmentation, information asymmetry of not knowing where the funding is, how it has come in is a big problem. The other thing is, in the space study, which we will launch in January, the issue of procurement. I mean, if you look at, we all know the story of SpaceX. It's NASA, yeah. It's a story of, as you say, empowering the private sector without being prescriptive of saying, I need the rocket that is that long and that, but just saying, I want something that goes up and down, and then provide, I mean, this very innovative procurement schemes which have brought scale and a real mission-oriented sort of push to get then the companies to develop and get scale quickly. Here again, Europe acting as 27, 28 member states, we again may be rather fragmented, and we don't even have per se that, perhaps that's, procurement mentality of seeing procurement as a huge, powerful push mechanism to bring these companies. So I think there's a lot we could do. We talk of a single market, but if we acted like one, it would bring the scale, but we just have to, I guess, do it. I mean,
well, exactly. Exactly. You highlighted the exact point I wanted to say. We have two things. Well, in China or in the US, what they do is they see a disruptive technology. They see that it could be commercial. They have the skills to change and to go quickly from an idea to a commercial. The return on investment is very fast. And to help this return on investment, the government, they engage with these companies. SpaceX, if they did not engage with NASA, so they will not be there. So they are helping them by providing a market. This is what China is also doing. They are providing the market, a lot of money, but also the market. So the problem we have here in Europe, that it's totally fragmented. From our point of view, when we want to put a vehicle on the market, we need to validate country per country each vehicle and each change. And each country has a different regulation. For example, we have in Denmark, they ask us to detect fire on the road. With our, well, other countries do not ask us this. Other countries ask us to do, for example, in Switzerland, they ask us to do a very high control on the brakes. In other countries, they don't do that. So we have a big framework here. And what's interesting with the EU single market is that we have investment, they support, okay? We have a single market, but to go on this single market is totally different because difficult, you don't have one decision maker.
So no, you're shifting slowly to red taping and the complexity of administration. I go back to my question, which is why, based on your experience, why is the state not being the customer? I mean, at the end of the day, we know some of the states are not yet digital, but you live in at least in the city of Amsterdam, it prides itself as being one of these early digital city of the world. You know, your experience about agriculture and the like, are they financing, are they interacting, are they saying, I will be the first client of this, ag-food type of a clever model that you have? Are they doing that, yes or no?
They are. Look, I think I should just call it for what it is. One, there's some great public money available. We've had access to the Horizon program. We got started by a very early European investment. I think Europe is fantastic when it comes to money. All right, there's money around. That's not the problem, in my opinion. You've got two problems that are slightly different. One is the risk appetite of VCs. Compared to China and the US, you're not even in the same ballpark. You're completely on a different planet altogether. The second, and I think we have to acknowledge this problem, is European markets are just not big enough for the kind of scale that you get in China and the US. They have the VC backing that looks at the national market, something born out of Silicon Valley, is going to go nationwide. It's a big economy, it's a big country, it's a single language, it's a single culture. And they've figured out the fact that, look, 80% of my portfolio companies will vanish. One will hit a home run, it will return the whole fund back to me. Yes, that's it, that's our strategy. You talk to European VCs, you're going to talk to, let's say, a Dutch VC, a British VC, a Spanish or a French VC. They're going to say, are you in the French market? Are you with French articles of association? This is the market we know, this is the industry we know. Look, it doesn't really quite work for us. And even if you dominate that market, it's just not big enough. The way to fix the problem, which is what we're doing, is we've done some tests and trials in Europe. We've got great customers, but we're actually looking at the US as our primary market. You really want to go big, you have to go transatlantic. It's difficult, but that's the way that you can really scale. So we have to look beyond them. Now, once we do it there, then we have the bandwidth and resources to do it for the member states in Europe, because each and every one of them, like you said, is different.
Your experience on that?
Startups in Eastern Europe don't really, they're not really eager in working with public administration.
They don't want to, you say? Or
no, they don't really want it. Usually this kind of relationship is quite tense, so they quite try to avoid it. What we managed to do in order to bridge the gap from the idea until the first VC investment is to kind of raise awareness about the EU grants that you can really access directly through the European Commission. But this is something that they are just starting to learn, that there are some opportunities outside the national market. I think this is the first step for us. And I will subscribe to what was said before. So even if we encourage them to validate in Europe, be that in Romania or in C area or the entire Europe, we try to get them to global stage. So for us, all these discussions about, I don't know, European startup, I'm sorry, but we are not from the public institutions. We just want the startup to scale fast, be successful. So for us, it's very entrepreneurial. Where you find the resources, you go for it. So it's not something, I don't want to tie startups to a certain country. So for me, the end value is the value I provide to startup. So yeah, you can, I think it's better to blend the funds. Don't get stuck in public funding, because then you will not be sexy for the investors. You don't have the reality check of the market, so you need customers, you need private funding. But I think there are stages where public money will help, and especially deep tech startups. They really need to understand when to go for the public funding and when to move forward to the private one.
Okay, so my point was not too much on public financing, it was much more about having the state as a major customer. Obviously, if they can put some finance, good too. Now, let's go to another question, which is, one of the narrative we see a lot in Europe, and I guess to your point, which is, let's not do the geographical boundaries of it, but still, people will say Europe possibly can win the B2B deep tech space. And as we know, what they call the B2B, we've got the proof of the concept, is in agriculture and you industrial as well. So there is a component of not software, but also an integration piece on the hardware piece, and obviously the industrial piece of it. And most of the time, the component of the car, it's still okay, but the day you got robots, these robots themselves don't have necessarily an integration platforms about how they synchronize themselves in everything else. So where do you see these things going? Is it true that Europe can be the B2B guy, or again, we're going to see the same problem, fragmentation, no standards in terms of IoT, in terms of data, in terms of system that can integrate correctly between the physical and the software? Where do you see that happening? For you, for instance, in agriculture stuff, I'm quite sure the model will be not only to predict and to optimize, but the day you have done that, you can automate the system and ship that and fulfill that, all that end-to-end. Can you do it? And you say, no, Europe is just too far, and it's going to be a lot of complexity as well there.
No, that's actually pretty cool. I think from a B2B standpoint, so with some harmonized EU regulations and standards, so for example, if you can get it to work in one country, from a technical standpoint, you can get it to work in other countries. You don't have to go through, at least in our space, you don't have to go through multiple steps. The other thing is that the size is small. You've got great connectivity, both from a telco standpoint, which is absolutely key when it comes to connecting everything. You don't have connectivity, you're dead, right? And the US is Canada, even China for that matter, they're not as well connected as Europe. And that, you have a big advantage there. We have a big advantage there. There's also some really, really good hubs on specific industries in the manufacturing space, whether it is in the agriculture space, transportation space, which we can leverage. And I think if you picked the right industries, Europe has a very good chance of being a true leader in those spaces. And we're seeing that. We're seeing a lot of those AI applications come in. Merck, for example, is doing some great work. In agriculture, we've got all the top companies in ag tech are actually European right now. So there are some sectors where it's really, really good.
Fantastic. It's always good to have a good news. Your perspective, who wants to share? But you should, Pierre, because you
Just to clarify the question, is what you're highlighting, whether is B2B is the main market for Europe or other things?
Well, I think people define B2B so loosely. I think the point is that there's an industrial dimension, and people say, well, we lost a bit of the service side, especially the high-tech service side. No, why not to move into the industrial processes? And where there is obviously a physical process on industrialization, which possibly can be automated, Europe has the connectivity, Europe has more knowledge in how this system works. And by the way, we are pretty good in robotics and in smart robotics, so we can actually integrate the software piece with the hardware piece and the connectivity piece together, and we can roll out.
Well,
so is it a good narrative, or you say, now it's not going to happen that way?
No, it's very interesting that you highlight that here in Europe, what we are really good at in two things. The first one is we are really good on the value, and we need to focus on this value. And this value is how to separate us from a large scale. China can go on a large scale very quickly. The market is very big. They can build factories very quick and do phones in Shenzhen. Everybody is doing phones in Shenzhen, for example.
Yeah.
And they are doing for the whole world. But what we can focus on is the value and the service. How to bring the user-centric approach and how to build a solution in a user-centric approach. So this is the first thing. The second thing we are very powerful on in Europe is that we can build standards. We can build really good standards. And we built standards. Etsy is in Europe and did build all the communication standards. So we are really good in building standards. But what we need to accelerate, and with the investment, what we need to accelerate is what you highlighted also with the state contracts, is to go from the idea to the concept, to the commercial, the return on investment. If it's long, it will kill companies.
Yeah. A side question, I'm quite sure you guys can elaborate on that. If we're good in looking at standardization, like, again, we look at Europe, we got constellation of companies. You know, we got the ITU, get good standards for the connectivity and infrastructure side. We got possibly something on the patent side. We've got people doing something on the finance side. So that's also a sign of fragmentation, or is it a sign of specialization? How will you read that from a perspective of commercialization and speed to market?
I mean, I guess in a way this is also our strength. So we have an ecosystem. It's perhaps where, again, the strength and the weakness, it's maybe not as well joined up, because in a way there is, you have the elements, and I think indeed, I mean, Europe has the elements for the deep tech sector, especially with all the manufacturing, how to make things to actually bring in the physical and the digital together. And hopefully the financing, which is really critical, and I fully agree with your point that it is, again, we need of course bigger amounts coming in earlier and so on. So I mean, I guess the point is but you also said there's no maybe lack of financing. So it's a bit sort of, we have the ingredients, but somehow we're not yet making the right soup or the right stew with it. And the question of it is it one of will? Is it one of capacity? I think we hear today and yesterday about there is a huge will, but then when we look at our national governments, they seem to nevertheless still think in nations, whether it's AI or.
So we come back on the fragmentation as well.
Actually, I wanted to add one point to your robot question.
Yes.
About the robot uprising, if you may want to call it that. There's one very interesting thing that we've seen in the agriculture space compared to other markets. And it's probably a taboo topic in some ways, which is the impact of AI on labor. And what we see, at least in agriculture, which is one of the biggest labor-intensive industries in the world, there's a lot of concern around that in the big markets, China, US, etc., Africa for that matter. You talk to European farmers, and they're actually all for it. And there's a very interesting trend over here to say, look, Europeans aren't afraid of optimization and improving productivity, because in Netherlands, you've got one person who can run a farm. The same farm in the US will need about 6 or 7. But they're very afraid of what's going to happen to labor. So if you take the flip side of the view, if you look at full automation driven by artificial intelligence, including robots or actuators, as we call them, I think it's a very good possibility to do it, if not across all Europe, but certainly in certain markets, it's very possible, and it'll actually be accepted.
Yeah, I like that. It's a great thing. So I guess we're close to the finish line, and people are, I guess, getting hungry. So the question that we've been asked as panelists is to say, look, if there's one wish for Christmas, call it one wish for the New Year this time. Which one will you take? So who wants to start? And by the way, you can have 2 wishes if you want.
I think the first wish is move from ecosystems to one European ecosystem, and that's a big challenge ahead of us. And the second one would be thinking about impact, maybe investment in financing deep tech startups. So no impact investment for social entrepreneurship, but thinking about the investment that will fuel the next startups that will change the society. So maybe having a different mindset in designing the new kind of grants or, I don't know, financing.
Yeah, possibly SDG based. Yeah. Who's next? You want to?
Well, she said it already, but
re-emphasize it.
I re-emphasize it, and again, I think let's use a resource we have. So please do knock at the EIB door. Maybe that's what I should wish. You know, so if you think that you are at the level where we can support you, give it a try. And so EIB, European Commission. I see also Ramona sitting in the audience. Our advisory is a joint partnership with the European Commission through Horizon 2020. So, you know, be bold and ask for the financing.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, if it's a gift for Christmas, sometimes we cannot have it. So I will ask something we cannot have, is to have a single market. It would be very interesting. But something we can have is really to go forward, to go to entrepreneurial, to take the risk, to fall, to get up, to really go to this challenge, and not to stay, well, US is doing better, we cannot face it. Chinese is doing better, we cannot face it. No, go for it.
Good point. Your last word?
Right. I have to think about this one. One is, on the personal side, I'd say I think my point of view looking at the European segment would be higher appetite for risk. And I guess the second wish would be for everybody to have a wonderful 2019.
Fantastic. So thanks so much for listening to us. I think it was a great debate. I really enjoy it. I want to thank the panel for doing that. And I guess it's time for lunch, I guess. Bye-bye.